Hey, my name is Kennedy Lawson. I'm 29 years old, and this is my story. They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when the blood you trust most becomes the very weight dragging you under? What if the person given every chance in life squanders it, while you, scraping by, build your world from scratch, only to have it all torn apart by your own flesh and blood? This story isn't just about struggle, it's about betrayal. It's about resilience, and it's about what happens when someone finally decides they've had enough. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if this story is touching your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe. You won't want to miss how this journey of betrayal turned into a powerful story of strength and transformation. I was born and raised in Madison, Wisconsin, a city with cold winters, hot summers, and a way of making you feel like life's either moving too fast or dragging on forever. My mom, Deborah, worked as a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. My dad, before he left, worked as a mechanic. And then there was Mason, my younger brother by 3 years, and the sun in my mother's eyes. Growing up, I was the quiet one, the one who did chores without being asked, who stayed up studying until midnight, who never gave my mom trouble. Mason? He was the opposite. Loud, rebellious, a natural charmer. The kind of kid who could crash a car on a Monday and get a new one by Friday just because he looked sorry enough. And somehow, no matter what he did, Mom always had an excuse for him. "He's still young," she'd say. Or, "Boys make mistakes." I stopped believing in fairness around age 16, the first time I had to get a job. While Mason was out partying or skipping school, I was bagging groceries at the Woodman's off Milwaukee Street. I'd come home exhausted, my arms aching from hours of standing and lifting, only to find Mason asleep on the couch, video game controller still in his hand, dinner waiting on the stove, for him. Mom would ask me why I looked so tired. I didn't bother answering. After high school, I didn't go to college. We couldn't afford it, or at least that's what Mom said. Meanwhile, Mason took a break from school and somehow got his tuition covered for a community college he never attended. I worked full-time at a local diner called Sugar Maple Cafe, and in the evenings I cleaned offices downtown. 2 jobs, barely enough to pay rent in our 2-bedroom apartment after Mom's hours got cut. I offered to help with bills. Mason somehow always needed help instead. I remember one winter especially well. The snow piled up past our windows and our heat barely worked. I came home one night with my hands cracked and bleeding from the cold, only to find Mason in the living room, showing off his new sneakers to his friends. Sneakers that probably cost more than I made in 2 weeks. When I asked Mom how he could afford them, she smiled like it was no big deal and said, "He needed them. You have your jobs, Kennedy. Let your brother breathe." Let him breathe? I was suffocating, but I kept my mouth shut. I told myself things would get better. That one day, I'd catch a break, maybe save enough to get my own place, or go back to school. But years passed, and every time I pulled ahead, something, or someone, pulled me back. It wasn't until I turned 28 that things began to shift. I got a job as a personal assistant for a small tech company based in Madison's East Side. The pay wasn't amazing, but it came with benefits and stability. For the first time in a decade, I dropped one of my jobs. I started sleeping more than 5 hours a night. I bought myself a real winter coat. I even opened a savings account. Slowly, I began to imagine a future that didn't involve exhaustion. But Mason? He still lived at home, still jobless, still draining Mom's bank account. And by then, she was sick. Not life-threatening, not yet, but tired, older, worn down by the years and the weight of protecting someone who never gave back. And when her health worsened, she turned to me. "Kennedy, I need your help with Mason," she said one night. "He's not doing well." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I wasn't doing well either, that for once, I needed someone to ask about me. But I just nodded and offered to cover groceries for the month. Again. And then, something happened. One evening I came home early and heard voices in the kitchen. Mason and one of his so-called friends. They didn't hear me come in. They were laughing, talking about how easy it was to manipulate Mom, how she always gave him money, no questions asked, how she still thought he was depressed, when in reality, he was buying weed and gaming equipment. She'll never know. Mason said. And Kennedy? She's just a mule. She works, I win. Something in me broke. All those years, all that sacrifice, all those frozen fingers, sleepless nights, skipped meals, and silent tears in the shower so Mom wouldn't hear. And here he was, the golden child, mocking both of us. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't say a word. But from that moment forward, I changed. I started documenting every dollar Mom sent him, every lie he told her, every receipt I found. I got into her email, her bank statements. I became an investigator in my own home, quietly piecing together the puzzle that no one else cared to see. It wasn't about proving I was better. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about finally opening her eyes. Because if she wouldn't see who Mason really was, I would make sure the rest of the world did. And that's when everything began to shift. But to understand what I did next, and how far I was willing to go, you'll have to hear the rest. I started waking up earlier, not to rush to work, but to listen, to observe. There's something you learn when you stop reacting and start watching. You see how people move, what they repeat, where the cracks form. Mason thought he was clever. He thought no one was paying attention, but I was. I noticed every whisper behind closed doors, every conveniently erased browser history on Mom's old laptop, every sudden withdrawal from her savings. I started tracking patterns, where he went, who he talked to, when he'd vanish for days only to come back with new clothes or gear, and I kept quiet. Because if I was going to do this right, I couldn't just speak the truth, I had to prove it. At work, I smiled. I sent emails, scheduled meetings, organized calendars. But inside, my mind was spinning. I'd never been the type to hold a grudge. Not really. But this wasn't just about a grudge. It was about justice. Mason didn't just hurt me. He manipulated our mother, drained her, lied to her face while calling her mama in that soft tone he used when he wanted something. He was poison wrapped in charm, and I'd watched him infect her my whole life. I started leaving a voice recorder running in the kitchen when I went to work. I bought a cheap one from a pawn shop, tucked it behind the flour container by the stove. Most days, it recorded nothing but the hum of the fridge and the occasional clink of dishes. But once in a while, it caught gold. Conversations Mason had with his friends about how much he hated getting a real job, how easy it was to make Mom feel guilty. She's old. He laughed once. She just wants peace. If I cry a little, say I miss Dad, she folds like a napkin. That line made me clench my fists so hard I left crescent marks in my palms. And the worst part? Mom defended him even when it hurt her. One night, after I got home from a long shift and found her on the couch rubbing her temples, I asked her if Mason had paid back the money she lent him for therapy. She looked up at me like a wounded animal. "He's trying, Kennedy," she whispered. "It's not easy for him." Not easy? Try working 12-hour days while a grown man lays in bed until noon and lives off pity. Try watching your dreams rot on a shelf while someone else takes all the chances you were denied, just because he knew how to cry at the right time. I wanted to yell at her, shake her, make her see, but I didn't. Instead, I hugged her, kissed the top of her head, and said, "I know, Mom." And later that night, I transferred another $100 to her account to cover the utility bill. The thing is, I didn't want to ruin Mason. Not yet. I wanted to rebuild me. Slowly, quietly, strategically. I reached out to an old friend from high school, Zoe, who worked part-time as a paralegal. I asked her about legal guardianship, about how much control an adult child could have if a parent began showing signs of mental decline. She asked if something was wrong with my mom. I told her I wasn't sure yet. I just wanted to understand my options. Because here's what scared me most. Not that Mason would ruin himself, but that he'd ruin her. That one day I'd come home and find the bank empty, the house sold, and my mother crying because she'd co-signed something she didn't understand. Or worse, because she didn't have the strength to say no. Around this time, Mason started acting differently. He got twitchy, nervous. He started locking his bedroom door, taking calls outside, whispering more than usual. One morning, I woke up and saw him in the driveway arguing with a man I didn't recognize. Short, bald, wearing a leather jacket in the middle of July. The man handed Mason something small and shiny, Mason slipped it into his pocket like it burned his fingers. That night, I followed him. He borrowed Mom's car, again, and told her he was going to a group therapy meeting. I waited 20 minutes, then took my own car and followed him. He didn't go to any meeting. He drove across town to a dimly lit warehouse on the edge of East Washington Avenue. I parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest. Through the broken fence, I saw him go inside. 30 minutes later, he came out with a duffel bag and a grin that made my skin crawl. I didn't know exactly what he was involved in: drugs, theft, something worse. But I knew one thing: it was illegal and dangerous. And if Mom ever found out, it would destroy her. I went home that night with a storm in my chest. I couldn't sleep. My heart felt like it was cracking from the inside. I wanted to protect her, but I was starting to realize I might have to destroy Mason to do it. And no matter how much he'd hurt me, he was still my brother. So I waited. A few weeks later, Mom ended up in the hospital. Nothing critical, a severe case of pneumonia, but enough to scare her, and enough to shift the balance of the house. For 5 days, Mason didn't visit her once, not even a text. I stayed by her side after work, bringing soup, folding her socks at home, helping her rest. And when she finally came home, pale and fragile, she looked at me like she hadn't in years. "You've always been the strong one," she said quietly. "I don't tell you that enough." It hit me harder than I expected. Then came the breaking point. I got a call from the bank about suspicious activity on Mom's account. They flagged 2 large withdrawals made back to back. When I confronted her, she looked confused. "I didn't take anything out," she said. "I haven't even been out of the house." I didn't accuse Mason. I just checked the security cameras I'd installed a month ago, secretly, in the hallway facing the front door. And there he was, 3 a.m., hoodie up, Mom's purse in hand, rifling through her wallet like it was his birthright. That was it. I compiled everything: the audio recordings, the footage, the financial records, screenshots of texts he sent bragging to friends about finessing his mom, photos from the warehouse, and the contact I traced to a known dealer through a friend in the police department. I printed it all out, put it in a manila folder, and slid it into Mom's lap one morning while Mason was out. At first, she didn't want to read it. She resisted, shook her head. No, Kennedy, this isn't—" But she did. She read every page. And by the time she finished, she was crying. Not gentle tears, but the kind that shake your whole body. She looked at me and said, "How could I not see it?" I didn't answer, because I wasn't done yet. I told her what I planned to do next, and for the first time in my life, she didn't tell me to stop. She nodded. She said, "Do what you have to do," and so I did. The folder sat between us like a silent witness, thick with evidence, betrayal, and years of overlooked pain. My mother didn't say much after she finished reading it, but her silence said enough. It wasn't the silence of denial or confusion. It was the silence of someone realizing they'd loved a lie. A silence so heavy it made the air in the room feel cold. She sat there, her hands trembling slightly, and I could see it in her face, that something inside her had broken. The mother who used to fiercely defend Mason, who once looked at him like he was her last hope, suddenly looked 20 years older. She got up and went to her room. She didn't say goodnight. She didn't ask me to stay. I let her go, because I knew this part wasn't about me. It was about her seeing him for who he truly was. And sometimes, that kind of truth hurts more than any betrayal. The next morning, Mason returned like nothing had happened. I watched him stroll into the kitchen, yawning, stretching, opening the fridge. "Yo, who finished the orange juice?" he said casually, like he hadn't stolen from the woman who'd raised him. I didn't say anything. I just watched, waiting. Mom walked into the kitchen slowly, her face pale but composed. She didn't look at him right away. She poured herself a glass of water, took a slow sip, then finally turned to him. "Mason," she said, calm and low, "we need to talk." He glanced at me, then back at her. "About what?" "I know what you've done," she said. "All of it." His smirk wavered. "What are you talking about?" "I've seen the footage," she continued. "The withdrawals, the lies, the warehouse. I know everything." There was a long pause. Then Mason laughed, short, nervous. "Wow, you're listening to her now?" he said, jerking his thumb toward me. "She's always hated me. No, she said, firmer now. She saved me. That's when I saw it. The moment he realized he'd lost her, his jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, and suddenly the charming little brother act slipped right off his face. You don't know what you're talking about, he muttered. You're sick. You're confused. No, she repeated. I'm finally seeing clearly. She reached for her purse and pulled out a small stack of papers, copies of the documentation I'd printed. She placed them on the table in front of him. You have two choices, she said. Leave this house today or I go to the police. He stared at her, stunned, as if he never thought the woman who coddled him through every failure could possibly turn her back on him. But the evidence was right there, and I was standing beside her this time, not behind her. You're bluffing, he said. I'm not. I have nowhere to go. You had choices, she said. You wasted them. For a long second, it was like time froze. Then, without another word, Mason shoved his chair back, stormed down the hallway, and slammed his bedroom door so hard the frame shook. We didn't follow him. We didn't need to, because this time, he knew it was over. He left that afternoon. I watched from the window as he stuffed his duffel bag into the back seat of a dented gray Honda, probably borrowed or stolen, and peeled out of the driveway. He didn't look back, and neither did I. But just because he was gone didn't mean the storm was over. Over the next few weeks, I tried to focus on normal life. Work, bills, helping Mom adjust to her medications. We even started eating dinner together again. Quietly, but peacefully. There were still moments of silence, moments where the air was heavy with everything we didn't say. But slowly, that silence became less about guilt and more about healing, until the messages started. At first, they were vague. Unmarked numbers. A simple, "You think you won?" or "Hope you're sleeping well." I blocked every one of them, but more kept coming. Then came the letters. No return address. Just angry scrawls in Mason's handwriting. This isn't over. You stole my life. You ruined me. He had never been one to take responsibility. He always needed someone to blame. I kept most of the letters to myself. Mom didn't need that weight. But one afternoon, a package arrived at the front door. No label, just our address scribbled in black marker. Inside was my old journal from high school, pages ripped out, smeared with something dark and sticky. The last page had one word scratched into it over and over: payback. That's when I knew this wasn't just anger. It was obsession. I took the package straight to the police. They logged it, filed a report, and told me to be careful. But there wasn't much else they could do. No direct threats, no fingerprints, just Mason's familiar stench all over everything. I started checking the locks twice every night. I changed my routes to work. I got pepper spray and kept it by my bed. Some nights I barely slept, heart pounding at every creak in the hallway, every gust of wind against the window. I wasn't afraid of him hurting me physically. Not really. I was afraid of him dragging me back down into the chaos I'd spent my whole life climbing out of. Then one night, it happened. I got home late from work, later than usual. The sky was dark, the driveway empty. I opened the door and immediately felt it. Wrong. The lights were off. Mom's coat was still hanging by the door, but her keys were gone. And the living room felt disturbed, like someone had been there, moving things, breathing the air. I called her name. No answer. I checked the kitchen. Empty. And then I saw it. Her phone, lying face down on the table, screen cracked, buzzing with missed calls. I picked it up, and my stomach dropped. The last call was from Mason. I raced through the house. Every room, every hallway, but she wasn't there. Panic clawed up my throat. I called the police, reported her missing. While I waited, I checked every message on her phone, every recent call, every app. One name kept popping up over and over again in the last few days. Jay. I didn't know who Jay was, but I had a feeling he was tied to Mason. Hours passed before we got a call. They'd found her car, abandoned near Lake Monona, driver's side door cracked open. No signs of a struggle, but no sign of her either. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I was frozen. By morning, the whole city felt like it was holding its breath. Flyers went out. Police canvassed the area. Friends and neighbors dropped by with food, prayers, and anxious questions. But none of it mattered. because I knew where she was. I just couldn't prove it. Until the next envelope arrived. It came in the mail, standard size, plain white, no return address. Inside was a single photo, grainy, taken from behind. My mom, sitting on a bench near the lake, looking out at the water, and standing behind her, half hidden in shadow, was Mason. No note, no threats, just a message written between the lines. Look what I can still do. That was the moment something inside me flipped. The quiet part, the patient part, the part that waited, hoped, endured. It was gone. What remained was steel, cold and sharp. He wanted to play games? Then I'd show him how the game ends, but not with noise, not with chaos, with strategy, with silence, with fire. I didn't go to work the next day. I called in sick, locked the doors, and sat at the kitchen table with every piece of information I had. The letters, the photo, the phone records, the audio files, even old screenshots from Mason's social media. I knew he wasn't dumb. Reckless, yes, but not dumb. He wouldn't hurt her. Not right away. He needed leverage, attention, and more than anything, he needed to feel in control. This wasn't just about money or revenge anymore. It was about ego, about making me sweat. So I gave him silence. I didn't respond to the photo. I didn't post anything. I didn't even mention it to the police. Not yet. I needed him to feel like I was off balance, that I was breaking. Because when people like Mason think they've won, they get careless. And when they get careless, they get caught. I spent the day digging, remembering, reconstructing every name, every place, every pattern from the last few years of his life. Jay. Who the hell was Jay? I scrolled through Mom's contacts again, scanned her call logs, and eventually found a number that kept popping up, but wasn't saved. A reverse lookup led to a burner, prepaid under a fake name. No surprise there. But then I noticed something else. The number had been used to schedule an appointment at a storage unit facility on the north side of Madison just 4 weeks earlier. The booking name? Jason T. Logan. My heart stopped. Jason. Jay. It was thin, but it was something. I drove out there myself. The place looked abandoned. Rows of rusting metal doors, a broken security gate, and an office that smelled like stale coffee and mildew. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up when I walked in. Need a unit? He mumbled. No, just asking about one. Unit 214, booked under Jason Logan. He squinted at me. You family? Yes, I lied. My brother. He shrugged. Haven't seen him around lately. Pays in cash. Weird guy. Any way I could look inside? He hesitated. Not without a key or warrant. I slid a $100 bill across the counter. He looked at it, then at me. You've got 10 minutes. The unit was in the back row, tucked between two others that looked completely untouched. He pulled the lock off, handed it to me, then turned and walked away without saying a word. I lifted the roll-up door slowly. The inside was dark, smelled like motor oil and mold. But what caught my eye was the folding chair in the corner, and beside it, a pile of receipts, plastic bags, and a familiar floral scarf that I knew belonged to Mom. She'd worn it on Easter. I'd taken a photo of her in it. The same scarf that now sat crumpled on the dusty floor of a storage unit my brother had rented under a fake name. I didn't touch anything. I just took photos. Every angle, every piece of evidence. Then I closed the unit and drove straight to the police station. They opened a formal investigation that afternoon. Detectives were assigned. Forensics teams were dispatched to the storage facility. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like something was moving, like the weight I'd been carrying might finally shift. Still, the guilt crawled inside me, because while I hadn't laid a hand on my mother, part of me felt responsible. I'd waited too long, watched too long. I'd known what he was capable of, and hoped the distance between us would keep him away. But Mason had never known limits, only weaknesses, and we'd been his perfect prey. That night, I sat in her bedroom. Her scent still lingered on the pillows, lavender and eucalyptus. I picked up her Bible from the nightstand, the one with underlines and sticky notes crammed between the pages. And inside, I found a note addressed to me. Kennedy, if you're reading this, it means something went wrong. I hope it didn't. I hope you're just being nosy and found this while cleaning. But if not, I want you to know I'm sorry. I should have listened to you sooner. I should have protected you, not the other way around. But I was scared, not of Mason, of failing as a mother, of admitting that I raised someone who could lie, steal, hurt. You deserved better than what I gave you. You've always been my strength, even when I didn't say it, even when I made excuses. I love you. Please don't let this destroy you. Find peace, even if it takes time. You deserve it. Love, Mom. I cried that night. Not the angry, bitter tears I'd cried before, but something quieter, sadder. I wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. I was fighting to honor a woman who'd spent her whole life sacrificing everything, even her vision of truth, for the sake of family. A week later, they found her. She was alive, hidden in a remote cabin 2 hours north of Madison, owned by a man named Jay Logan, Mason's high school friend turned accomplice. According to the police report, Mason had convinced Jay to help protect Mom from a supposed mental breakdown. He'd painted me as a manipulator, someone trying to gain power of attorney and lock her in a home. Jay, a recluse with a history of paranoid delusions, believed him. They'd driven her out of town under the guise of a weekend trip, then taken her phone, isolated her, and told her no one was looking. But she never believed them. Not for a second. And when the police stormed in, she didn't scream. She just stood up and said, "What took you so long?" The reunion at the hospital was quiet. No tears. No dramatic hugs. Just two women who'd survived the same storm, finally breathing fresh air again. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "You found me." "I told you I would," I said. Jay was arrested, cooperated, gave them everything. Mason went on the run, again, but this time they had enough to charge him. Fraud, kidnapping, identity theft. He couldn't charm his way out of it. Not anymore. I stood in court 6 weeks later and testified. I told them everything, not just about the last few months, but about the last decade, about the pattern of manipulation, the cycle of guilt, the lies we told ourselves to survive. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I looked him in the eyes and watched as, for the first time in his life, he had no words. He was sentenced to 8 years. Not as much as I wanted, but enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to rebuild. Enough to start again. Mom moved in with me for a while. We went to therapy. We talked about the past. The good, the bad, the things we both wished we could change. Some nights we laughed. Some nights we sat in silence. But the distance between us slowly faded. We learned how to be mother and daughter again. Without lies. Without shadows. Without Mason. And me? I found a version of myself I didn't know existed. Not just a survivor. Not just the strong one. But someone capable of fighting back. Of building peace not just outside, but within. The air inside the courtroom had a taste to it. Stale, metallic, heavy with consequences. I remember the coldness of the bench beneath me, the way my hands fidgeted in my lap, and how everything around me blurred except for the small rectangular space where my brother sat just beyond the barrier, dressed in a wrinkled suit too big for him. Mason looked thinner, paler. He had dark circles under his eyes and that same smug twitch in his jaw, like he was trying to find a version of himself to perform, unsure which mask might actually save him this time. But none of them could. He didn't look at me when I entered the room. He stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, hands folded, pretending to be someone reformed. The attorney whispered in his ear, probably telling him to look remorseful, keep his eyes soft, don't interrupt. I knew those tricks too well. Mason had been pretending for most of his life. The prosecution laid everything out. The stolen money, the identity fraud, the psychological manipulation, the forced isolation of our mother under false pretenses. They even played a short clip from the storage unit's surveillance footage and showed a blown-up image of my mother's scarf, wrinkled, filthy, and tossed aside like trash. Each detail felt like a cut to my chest, but I didn't flinch. I wanted every person in that room to see the truth we had lived with for so long. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly. My knees felt weak, but my spine held straight. "I'm not here to ruin my brother's life," I began, my voice steady. "I'm here because he tried to ruin ours." I spoke about our childhood, about the imbalance that shaped us. I told them about the grocery bags I carried at 15, the midnight cleaning shifts, the way I used to sleep with my boots by the door in case I needed to leave in a hurry. I spoke about my mother's slow unraveling over the years, how she kept pouring into a son who only knew how to take. I told them about the lies, the threats, the manipulation that escalated until it wasn't just emotional abuse, it was criminal. I told them how she almost disappeared from my life completely because he needed someone to blame for his own failure. And then I paused just for a breath, and I turned to him. "Mason," I said, and for the first time, he looked at me. "You were given every chance, every bit of love, every second chance I never got, and you turned it into a weapon. Not just against me, but against the one person who never stopped loving you. I don't hate you. I pity you. And I hope, truly hope, that one day you look in the mirror and finally see what you became. But I won't carry your weight anymore. I won't be your witness or your excuse." I sat back down, chest pounding, eyes burning. When the sentence was read, 8 years without parole, Mason flinched. His shoulders sagged. The judge's voice was calm, clinical, but final. The gavel echoed through the courtroom like a door slamming shut. He didn't look at me again. He was led away in cuffs, head down, and that was it. Or so I thought. The truth is, closure doesn't come with a sentence. It comes later, slowly, unevenly, and when you least expect it. The weeks that followed were quiet, almost eerily so. The house felt different without the tension, without the second-guessing every creak or knock. Mom started planting herbs on the windowsill again. She painted the hallway a soft green, said she needed something that felt alive. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since high school. I found pages filled with my younger self's anger, confusion, exhaustion. I wanted to reach through time and hug that girl, tell her she wasn't crazy, that she wasn't wrong to feel unseen. One night, I was sitting in the living room, the TV buzzing low in the background, when Mom walked in holding an old shoebox. "I think you should have this," she said. Inside were photos, old ones, of us as kids, birthdays, vacations, school plays. Most of them featured Mason smiling that perfect mischievous grin, while I stood to the side, arms folded or eyes half shut. But there was one photo that caught me off guard. Me at 13, holding a trophy from a spelling bee, while Mason stood beside me, clapping. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if the moment had ever been real. "Do you remember that day?" she asked softly. "Not really," I said. "I do," she said. "You were so proud, but he threw a tantrum on the ride home because you got all the attention. I didn't know how to handle it. I tried to calm him down and I think I told you, your win didn't matter that much. Just to keep the peace." I looked up at her. She was crying now. Quiet tears, the kind that drip without sobbing. "I've carried that guilt ever since," she whispered, and I let it grow. I kept trying to fix what was broken in him, and in doing so, I broke what was whole in you. I didn't know what to say, so I reached across the table and held her hand. Because even if forgiveness takes time, love sometimes doesn't ask for permission. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. From Mason. It was scrawled on yellow paper. No return address, no introduction. It read, "You think you won, but you'll always carry me. Every time you look in the mirror, remember that you stepped on your own brother to rise. You made me into this. You always wanted to be the victim, Kennedy. You finally got your wish." There was no apology, no acknowledgement, just venom. I read it once, then folded it carefully and placed it in the fireplace. I didn't need his words anymore. Not to validate me, not to hurt me, not to hold power over me. I was free, and freedom doesn't always look like celebration. Sometimes it looks like silence, like peace, like waking up and not checking over your shoulder, like walking into your own kitchen and knowing the only person standing in the room is you. I started running again, not for exercise but for clarity. Through the streets of Madison, early in the morning when the world was still asleep. I let the wind whip past me. I let the cold bite my cheeks. And somewhere in that rhythm, I found pieces of myself again. I started writing essays, short stories. I applied for a creative writing program at a local college. And I got in. Mom came with me on the first day of class. She waited in the parking lot, holding a thermos of tea, waving from the passenger side window like it was my first day of kindergarten all over again. I smiled, because after everything we'd been through, she was still there, and so was I, whole, healing, moving forward. But I never forgot what got me here: the years of sacrifice, the lessons of pain, and the fire of revenge. Not the loud, explosive kind, but the quiet, strategic burn that clears the field so something new can grow. The first time I walked into my creative writing class, I felt like an imposter. Everyone was younger, sharper, fresh out of high school or in the middle of their degrees. They had notebooks filled with stories about heartbreak, fantasy, dreams that still shimmered untouched by time. And then there was me, almost 30, carrying a past heavy enough to crush most people twice my age. But I sat down, opened a clean page, and wrote anyway. My professor, Dr. Ellison, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, with a voice that made every room go still. She didn't tolerate excuses. She pushed us. But she saw me. Not in the way people pretend to listen, but in the way she would pause, reread a line I'd written and ask, "Why did you use this word?" As if every syllable had weight. For the first time in a long time, someone asked me to explain my truth, and waited for the answer. Meanwhile, at home, Mom had started volunteering at a local senior center. After years of being drained emotionally, she found joy in pouring into people who asked for nothing in return. I watched her come back to life little by little, her shoulders looser, her laughter lighter. We repainted the living room together one Saturday morning. She chose a soft cream. "I want it to feel like sunlight," she said. And it did. We kept things simple, safe. We built routines: morning tea, Sunday dinner, evening walks in the neighborhood when the sky turned a soft lavender and the air smelled like freshly cut grass. We didn't talk about Mason much, not because we were pretending it didn't happen, but because we didn't need to anymore. He no longer lived in our present, only in our lessons. But healing doesn't come in a straight line. One evening, about 3 months after the trial, I came home and found Mom sitting in the dark, clutching a photo. It was one I hadn't seen in years. Her, Dad, Mason, and me, smiling on a trip to Devil's Lake. I was 12. Mason was 9. We were covered in dirt and marshmallow from the campfire. Our eyes sparkled with something pure. "I miss who I thought he was," she whispered. I sat beside her, gently taking the photo. "I know," I said. "Me too." She looked at me then, and I could see the depth of her sorrow, not just for what Mason had done, but for everything she'd believed and lost in the process. For the years spent justifying, defending, hoping. Sometimes grief isn't about a person dying. It's about realizing they were never who you needed them to be in the first place. That night, we didn't speak much. We just sat there, shoulder to shoulder, holding space for what could never be undone. The next week, I wrote a story. It wasn't about Mason, not directly. It was about a woman who carried a storm in her chest and a brother made of smoke. About a house built on silence, and a voice that cracked open the ceiling. When I turned it in, Dr. Ellison handed it back with only 4 words scribbled across the top. This was truthful. "Keep going." I framed that paper and put it on my desk. Meanwhile, Mason sent one last letter. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I recognized the handwriting, the looping M, the overly aggressive underlines. I burned it without reading a single word. And with that, the last tether snapped. Months passed. Winter rolled in like it always did in Madison, hard, bitter, unapologetic. But inside our house, there was warmth. Mom finally took the trip to Chicago she'd always wanted, and I started submitting short stories to magazines. One of them got accepted, a small one, but it felt like the beginning of something. For the first time, my name was printed beside something I created. Something born from pain and turned into purpose. I visited Mason's prison once, not to see him, just to stand outside, to breathe the same air he did, not as a sister, but as a woman who survived him. I didn't stay long, just long enough to say goodbye, not to him, but to who I had been while he was in my life. And then I left. Life didn't become magical after that. There were still bills to pay, dishes to wash, long days and longer nights. But something inside me had changed. I no longer carried the weight of being the strong one, because no one else would. I was strong because I chose to be, and because I'd learned I didn't have to carry everything alone. One Saturday, I hosted a small dinner at the house. Friends from class, a neighbor or two, even Zoe, my high school friend who had helped me dig into Mason's lies. We sat around the table, laughing, eating, passing plates and memories. Someone asked what inspired my writing. I didn't give the full story, just smiled and said, "Life." Later that night, after everyone left, I stood by the window and looked out at the quiet street. Snow was starting to fall again, soft and slow, the kind that blanketed the world in stillness. Behind me, Mom was humming in the kitchen, cleaning up without being asked. And I stood there, hand resting on the windowsill, letting the peace settle in my bones. It struck me then how much had changed and how much hadn't. The house was still the same, the city was still the same, but we weren't. We had rebuilt, not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with daily choices, with gentleness, with forgiveness, not for Mason, but for ourselves, for the years we lost, for the time we couldn't get back, for the blind spots we never saw coming. And as I turned off the lights and walked to my room, I felt a strange, quiet pride, not because we had survived, but because we had chosen not to stay broken. That, in the end, was the real revenge. Not his sentence, not his silence, but our healing. It's been 3 years since that courtroom gavel struck wood and ended one chapter of my life. 3 winters have come and gone in Madison, and each one has carried its own kind of weight. Some mornings I still wake up expecting a message from an unknown number, a whisper from the past trying to claw its way back in, but it never comes. Mason is still in prison. Last I heard, he'd gotten into a few fights, was moved to a different unit, and had tried his hand at writing poetry. Part of me wonders if it's real or another performance, something to pass the time, a new identity to wear like a coat that never really fits. I don't ask questions anymore. I don't search for updates. That part of my life is behind a locked door, and I've thrown away the key. Mom is doing better than ever. Her health has improved, and the brightness in her eyes has returned. She's become somewhat of a local legend at the senior center, teaching watercolor classes and hosting bingo nights like a queen in her own quiet kingdom. People gravitate to her kindness, her quiet wisdom. They don't know everything she's lived through, but they feel the strength that hums beneath her calm exterior. And I see it now more than I ever did before. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just shows up, day after day, unshaken. We still live in the same house, though it looks different now. We replaced the old curtains with soft blue ones, repainted the hallway again, and finally got around to fixing the creaky step that used to wake us up in the middle of the night. Mom planted a garden in the backyard. Nothing too fancy, just a few tomatoes, herbs, and lavender. She says the lavender keeps the bad spirits away. I don't know if that's true, but I like the smell of it on my windowsill when the breeze rolls in. As for me, I finished my writing program. I graduated with honors. I didn't invite many people to the ceremony, just Mom and Zoe, and that was enough. I remember standing on the stage in my cap and gown, the weight of the diploma in my hand, and feeling something I hadn't felt in years, pride. Not the kind born from comparison or recognition, the kind that whispers, "You did it," even when no one thought you could. After graduation, I got a job teaching part-time at a local community center, helping women write their own stories. Most of them come from hard places: domestic abuse, addiction recovery, loss. But they sit around that table every Tuesday afternoon with pens in their hands and stories in their eyes. I don't teach them how to be writers. I help them remember that they already are. We share our work out loud sometimes. Some of it is painful. Some of it is hilarious. One woman, Carla, wrote a poem about throwing her ex's clothes into Lake Mendota in the middle of a thunderstorm. Another woman, Mary, wrote a letter to the daughter she hasn't seen in 8 years. And each time I see the same thing I once felt, the slow return of voice, of power, of something that was taken finally being reclaimed. I write too, every day. Sometimes early in the morning before the sun comes up, sometimes late at night when the house is quiet and all the world feels still. I've been working on a novel. It's not about Mason. Not really. It's about a girl who grows up in the shadow of a brother everyone worships, who spends years trying to be enough, only to realize that her greatest freedom comes when she stops trying to be anything at all except herself. It's fiction, but like all fiction, it's laced with truth. A few publishers have shown interest. I've gotten rejections too, of course. But each letter, whether it's a yes or a not yet, reminds me that I'm on the path I was always meant to walk. Not because it's easy, but because it's mine. I've dated a little. Nothing serious. Trust doesn't come easily after everything, and I'm okay with that. I've learned to enjoy my own company. I go to movies alone. I take myself to lunch. I read in the park on Saturdays and don't rush through anything. There's a peace in solitude that I never used to understand. Now I crave it like water. Zoe and I talk often. She still works in law but is thinking about switching careers, maybe doing something more creative. She says my bravery inspired her. I tell her she was brave first. We laugh, disagree, laugh again. Some friendships survive because they adapt. Others survive because they never needed to. Ours is the latter. Mom and I have created new traditions. Every Friday night, we have memory hour. We take out old photos, old journals, and we share one story from the past, good or bad. The rule is, no judgment, just truth. We've cried together more in the last year than we did in the entire decade before, and somehow, every tear has stitched us closer. One Friday night, she pulled out a letter I'd written her when I was 17. I didn't remember writing it. It was full of anger. Pages and pages of raw frustration where I'd begged her to see what was happening with Mason. She read it out loud, her voice breaking more with each line. When she finished, she said, "I'm sorry it took me so long to believe you." I took the letter from her hands and folded it gently. "I don't need you to apologize anymore," I said. "You were doing your best. We all were." She reached across the table, touched my hand, and whispered, "Your best saved my life." The room went still, not heavy, just full. Of all the words exchanged in the past few years, those were the ones that stayed with me most, because they were true, not just for her, but for me. I didn't save her by screaming or accusing. I saved her by enduring, by watching, by waiting, by building something solid when the ground kept crumbling under us. And when the time came, I acted, not in rage, but in clarity. I still think about Mason sometimes, not often, but when I do, it's not with hate. It's not even with sadness. It's with distance. Like remembering a house I once lived in that no longer exists. I don't know who he is anymore. I don't want to. My story moved forward. His stayed where it was. A few months ago, I got an email from one of the women in my writing group. She said, "I wrote a piece I never thought I could. I finally said the thing I was afraid to say. Thank you for making space for me." And it reminded me, this is what healing looks like. It's not just surviving the fire. It's planting a garden in the ashes. It's creating something new where something painful used to live. My name is Kennedy Lawson. I worked 2 jobs to survive while my brother got handouts. And in the end, I didn't get revenge by hurting him back. I got revenge by living well, by choosing peace, by rewriting the ending. And I hope, if you're holding your own storm, your own silence, your own history of being overlooked, you remember this. You are not what they did to you. You are what you build from it. And that is powerful beyond measure. Have you ever carried the weight of a family secret, afraid that speaking up would tear everything apart? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. If my journey resonated with you, please like and subscribe to follow more powerful stories about resilience, healing, and reclaiming your voice. Send this to someone who might be struggling in silence, unsure of how to break free. Remember, sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply choosing peace and building a life on your own terms. Thank you for listening, and never forget, your voice matters.